Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. I want you to step straight into the war room with me and look at the world, well, a little differently. You see, when we think about true global power, we usually picture massive armies, cutting-edge fighter jets, or these huge nuclear arsenals. But if you look at it from the perspective of a global military strategist, that's really only half the picture. The real power, the kind of leverage that actually dictates the fate of entire nations, isn't held by brute force alone. It's actually held by 14 incredibly fragile maritime bottlenecks.
So think about the world map for a second. We look at those vast, wide-open oceans and we think it's an illusion of total freedom, right? Well, actually, scratch that. In reality, global shipping is funneled into incredibly tight corridors. If any single one of these specific doors were to be shut down by a hostile power, the global economy wouldn't just slow down, it would effectively collapse by tomorrow morning. Gas stations would run dry, food supplies would literally rot in containers, and life-saving medicines would just vanish from shelves.
Okay, so let's dive into this. What exactly are we looking at here? In geopolitics, these narrow passages are called choke points, and just like the name implies, they are the vulnerable throat of global trade. For any military strategist, a choke point is the absolute ultimate leverage point. You don't need a massive navy to control the ocean, you just need to control the door everyone has to walk through. It's really that simple.
To truly grasp how vulnerable we all are, here's our strategic briefing menu for today. 1. The strategic chessboard. 2. Weaponizing global energy supply. 3. Severing the trade arteries. 4. Superpower naval containment zones. 5. Alternatives and future battlegrounds. And finally, number 6. Who controls the board?
All right, moving to section 1, weaponizing global energy supply. Let's head straight to the Middle East for our first critical sector, the energy lifelines. Because, let's be honest, if you want to hold the world hostage, you start right where the world's most vital resource flows.
30%. Just let that sink in for a second. That is the massive chunk of the entire world's total oil supply that passes through just one door, the Strait of Hormuz. It's this tiny, highly congested strip of water sitting directly between Iran and Oman, and at its narrowest point, it's a mere 33 kilometers wide. Millions of barrels of oil pass through here every single day, heading out to the US, Europe, and Asia. If Iran ever decided to just park its military there and completely seal that passage, the immediate spike in global inflation and energy costs would be completely catastrophic. It's exactly why major powers keep a permanent, super hawkish gaze on this one tiny strip of water.
Now, what's really fascinating and terrifying is that history is currently repeating itself at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. In Arabic, this literally translates to the Gate of Tears. Located between Yemen and Djibouti, this is the essential gateway for ships traveling from Asia to Europe right before they hit the Red Sea. Historically, it earned its name because pirates and incredibly deadly waves routinely destroyed vessels here. Today, it's a modern flashpoint, with Yemen's Houthis actively launching attacks on passing cargo. And when this single gate becomes too dangerous, ships are forced into this massive detour, all the way around the entire continent of Africa. That costs weeks of transit time, millions of dollars in extra fuel, and inevitably drives up the cost of everyday goods for all of us. It's an audacious reminder of how fast modern trade can be dragged right back to the 16th century.
Moving right along to section 2, severing the trade arteries. Let's shift our focus away from energy for a minute and look at the most critical manufactured links connecting the East and the West. $54 billion. No, that's not a typo. That represents pure economic hemorrhage. It's the staggering economic loss the world suffered in just 6 days back in March 2021. Why? All because a single ship, the Ever Given, got stuck diagonally in the Suez Canal. This man-made marvel in Egypt connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, acting as the absolute backbone of East-West trade. During those 6 days, millions of dollars in food, essential machinery, and consumer goods were just paralyzed out in the middle of the ocean. It proved beyond a shadow of a doubt how incredibly fragile our interconnected world really is. Heading up to Europe, we hit the Strait of Gibraltar. This incredibly narrow passage sits right between Spain and Morocco. It is so tight that on a clear day, you can literally stand in Europe and see Africa across the water. From a strategic standpoint, whoever controls this door controls half the trade flowing between Europe and the African continent. If Gibraltar was shut down, the entire Mediterranean Sea would instantly transform into an isolated, closed-off lake, completely severing the naval ties of half of Europe. This is precisely why Britain still maintains a heavily fortified military base right at this crucial pinch point.
Okay, heading over to the Americas, we find one of the greatest engineering miracles in human history, the Panama Canal. Before this existed, navigating from New York to San Francisco meant a grueling, months-long, super dangerous journey around the entirety of South America.
Instead, engineers sliced through the land and built this ingenious lock system. It's wild. They literally elevate massive ships with water, drag them across the mountain terrain, and lower them back down into the next ocean. It's basically a geographic cheat code. For the U.S. Navy and commercial fleets alike, this grants a massive, unparalleled speed advantage, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific in a matter of hours instead of months. And, we really can't talk about critical trade arteries without mentioning the English Channel. Sitting right between the UK and France, this is the pathway to massive, vital European ports like Rotterdam. Over 400 commercial ships navigate this channel every single day. If you control the English Channel, you essentially control the economy of Northern Europe. Hitler knew this during World War II, which is exactly why he tried so desperately to take it, and why the British Navy fought so fiercely to defend this exact stretch of water.
All right, Part 3, Superpower Naval Containment Zones. This is where things get really tense. Let's shift our perspective to how superpowers actively use maritime geography to trap, contain, or block one another.
So the crucial point here is understanding what military strategists call the Malacca Dilemma. The Strait of Malacca is this hyper-congested passage bordering Malaysia, Indonesia, and the incredibly wealthy nation of Singapore. Roughly 25% of all global sea trade routes right through here, feeding the massive economies of China, Japan, and South Korea. For China, this is a glaring life-or-death vulnerability. They know that in a major conflict, the U.S. Navy could easily blockade this strait, instantly severing China's oil supply lines and completely crippling their economy. This deep geographical fear is the primary engine driving China's massive, multi-billion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative. They are desperately trying to build overland backups just to bypass this naval choke point.
Speaking of trapping superpowers, let's look at the Bosporus and Dardanelles Straits. Under international law, Turkey holds the keys to these doors, giving them the ultimate power to dictate exactly which warships are allowed to pass between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. For Russia, this is an absolute red line. While Russia is a massive country, most of its northern ports freeze solid during the winter. The Black Sea is their only reliable, year-round, ice-free gateway to the rest of the world. Because Turkey controls this exit, Turkey holds immense geopolitical leverage over Russian naval operations.
And this brilliantly illustrates why the Taiwan Strait is universally considered the single biggest flashpoint for a potential World War III. 70% of the world's microchips, the essential brains inside your smartphone, your car, your computer, your advanced military tech, are manufactured in Taiwan. The global reliance on this tiny island is unprecedented, and absolutely all of that technology must ship right through the Taiwan Strait to reach the rest of the world.
But here's the thing. For China, Taiwan isn't just about controlling microchips or historic territorial claims. Geographically speaking, it is a prison. There's an entire first island chain stretching from the Philippines up through Taiwan and into Japan that effectively walls off China's coast. Worse still, the waters off China's immediate coast are relatively shallow, making it incredibly difficult to hide their nuclear submarines. Taking Taiwan is a strict geographical necessity for Beijing. If they control that island, their naval forces suddenly gain direct, unhindered deepwater access into the open Pacific Ocean, allowing them to directly project power against the U.S.
Which brings us to Section 4, Alternatives and Future Battlegrounds. So what actually happens when these primary doors slam shut? Let's move to the backup plans in the shifting geographical landscapes that military strategists are actively eyeing for tomorrow's conflicts.
Look, when the main door slams shut, you better have a back door, and Indonesia happens to sit on the ultimate strategic alternatives. If the Malacca Strait becomes too dangerous or congested, ships have to pivot. One option is the Sunda Strait, but it's pretty shallow and plagued by active underwater volcanoes. The real prize here is the Lombok Strait. While it is a longer detour, its waters are incredibly deep, making it the only viable path for the massive, ultra-heavy oil tankers that simply cannot scrape through Malacca. Because of this, Indonesia has the immense potential to emerge as an absolute powerhouse of maritime strategy in the coming decades.
Sometimes, though, the backup plan is just going way, way back in history. If climate change causes water levels in the Panama Canal to drop too low, global shipping is forced back down to the Strait of Magellan, a freezing, violent, and highly dangerous path at the very tip of South America. Similarly, as we see the Red Sea under attack today, ships are falling back on the Cape of Good Hope at the bottom of Africa, taking the exact route Vasco da Gama used centuries ago. They aren't perfect choke points for sure, but these harsh, exhausting routes are the world's only fallback options when our primary doors fail.
Let's move to the future and see how this builds into tomorrow's reality. Global military planners are whispering a new mantra. Whoever becomes the boss of this new door will be the boss of global trade in the coming century. They're talking about the Bering Strait. Situated right between Alaska and Russia, it's historically been locked under impenetrable ice. But due to global warming, that ice is rapidly melting. Soon, a brand new, incredibly short trade route connecting Asia directly to Europe and the Americas is going to open up entirely. Both the US and Russia are already scrambling to assert military dominance here, because whoever controls this new icy corridor will absolutely dictate global trade for the 21st century.
Finally, Section 5, Who controls the board? We have analyzed the vulnerable lifelines, the flashpoints, and the future battlegrounds. Now let's zoom out and look at the whole shebang for the final strategic revelation of this explainer.
When you actually run the numbers, the strategic picture becomes crazy clear. Out of these 14 vital global choke points, the United States has successfully secured direct or indirect military and diplomatic influence over 10 of them. Through historical alliances, strategic bases, and continuous naval patrols, the current world order is largely maintained simply because this single superpower effectively watches over the vast majority of the doors.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. If the global economy, the flow of energy, and international peace all rely on just 14 incredibly fragile maritime doors, what happens to our reality the morning a single key is taken by a rival power? You see, a localized skirmish in a narrow strait thousands of miles away doesn't just stay there. It ripples out immediately, shutting down factories, spiking inflation, and potentially plunging superpowers into open conflict. Next time you look at a globe, don't look at the massive oceans. Look at the narrow gaps between the land, because that is where the true battle for the world is being fought. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.